They buried an empty box and told me to leave my own home in 3 days. That's what it felt like, standing under the yellowed lights of St. Bartholomew's in Naperville on a hard December 12th. Snow whispering against the stained glass, while a sealed mahogany casket sat 10 steps from my shoes and 3 miles from the truth. Cara, my daughter-in-law, squeezed hands in the receiving line with a smile practiced in real estate photos, not in grief. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. I'm Martin Redding, and this is what a lie sounds like when it knocks on your door, demanding everything you hold. Pastor Glenn tried to guide us into a final prayer near the casket. "Perhaps Mr. Redding would like," he began. Cara cut, in soft and firm. "We're keeping it dignified, Pastor. The casket is sealed by order." By order of what? She didn't say. My hands found the pew back, fingers reading old carvings like Braille. I didn't cry. Grief didn't come like rain. It came like subtraction, quietly removing the things that keep a man upright. Night fell early. The memorial crowd thinned into cold air and exhaust. On my front steps on Chicago Avenue, the street lamp flickered like a failing heartbeat. Cara leaned close, perfume sweet as frosting. 3 days, Martin," she breathed, almost kind. "We'll have the place show ready by the weekend. Interest rates are a beast right now." I held my phone low, thumb on record. Her words slid into the microphone like a blade returning to its sheath. Inside, the house coaxed heat through the vents. I hung my wool coat on the same brass hook I'd installed in '92. The oak kitchen table waited with its familiar scars. One long groove where my son, aged 10, had tried to pry open a battery with a screwdriver while I pretended not to see. A stack of memorial programs lay like a small drift. Something white peeped from beneath them, a folded invoice. I pulled it free and read aloud to the emptiness. Deck 7, Redding Memorial Package, $2,800. 5 days before she told me anything. I set it flat and smoothed the crease with my palm until the paper warmed. This house is my retirement. Every receipt is my pension. I opened the file drawer that holds 30 years of life, property tax receipts through Q4, the paid-off deed. With my name printed clean, utilities zeroed for December. I lined them in a row like soldiers and felt my breath even out. People think electricians live by sparks, but the truth is we live by codes, by what has to be true or the lights don't. Come on, I replayed the audio. 3 days, Martin. In the background, a car door thumped, a neighbor laughed, a wind chime counted 3 notes. Proof hides in ordinary sounds. I saved the file and wrote, "Cara, 3 days, front steps. Night of deck 12. I slid the florist invoice under. A magnet on the fridge, the kind shaped like a dog bone my wife used to love. The magnet held. So would I. I stood at the sink and watched snow sift under the streetlight. If a man can be buried on paper, he can be unburied by it too. I clicked off the kitchen light and left the porch one glowing, just as I had when my boy stayed out too late. 3 days, I said to the empty room. We'll see. Grief didn't roar the next morning. It subtracted. On December 13th, Naperville looked washed in dishwater light, the kind of gray that makes brick buildings look tired. I walked Chicago Avenue with my hands buried in my coat and my chin tucked down like I owed money to the wind. Outside the corner pharmacy, a newspaper box clicked shut after a man bought the front page. Offshore platform collapse. No recoverable remains. Cara had used those exact words in my living room, like she'd underlined them in a script. I kept moving until the bells over the door at Dundee's Diner gave me away. The place smelled like bacon and bleach. I took a booth by the frosted window and ordered coffee I didn't need and a slice of pie I wouldn't taste. The waitress set the mug down on a paper placemat with little ads for locksmiths and accountants. I pulled my phone closer and signed into the bank portal, where my son and I had once compared savings goals like baseball cards. The numbers glowed calm, as a lie detector that hadn't been turned on. There it was, $12,000 transfers set to recur on the first of each month to a payee named Helena Care Group, the first debit hitting December 1st, 12 days before. The memorial, 12 days before I stood in front of a sealed box. The pie's cherry shine looked like stage blood. I scrolled deeper into the detail view. Authorization established November 28th at 4:22 p.m. Note field blank. No memo about hospice or end-of-life anything. If the dead are paying for care, then the dead are not dead. I took a pen from my pocket and wrote the date and amount in the margin of the placemat, drawing a box around it like a small protective fence. The waitress refilled my cup. "You all right, hun?" she asked, not unkindly. "Numbers," I said, and touched the brim of the mug as if it were a hat. I paid the $6.85 bill and kept the credit card slip because paper is kinder than memory. As I stepped out, a man opened the door for a woman carrying an armful of lilies, white, like the ones that had leaned over the closed casket. She smiled at him and said, "Just in time." I stood still until they passed. Back home, the house sighed at me. I sat on the edge of the couch with the denim jacket my boy left behind last fall, the collar still stained where he rubbed it oil with dish soap and humor. I held the jacket to my face and inhaled sawdust and winter and a hint of whatever cheap cologne he'd used since high school. My eyes didn't water. Instead, a tightness pulled through my chest the way a wire pulls taut before it snaps. I called Pastor Glenn. He answered on the first ring. "Martin, he always says your name like a prayer." I told him about the headline. "And the sealed casket and the money." He cleared his throat. I asked Kara about a private prayer right by the casket. She said the casket was sealed by state order because of the accident. He lowered his voice. I checked. Illinois has no such mandate. There are circumstances, public health, but this didn't sound like that. I thanked him, and we hung up like men stepping away from the same ledge. Late afternoon slid toward dark. The heat kicked on and the vents ticked. I took the florist invoice from the fridge and wrote the date, December 7th, and then beneath it the new date, December 10th, from the Reliant Mutual letter that had inexplicably arrived in my mail. "We acknowledge initial widow inquiry," it said, stamped 2 days before the memorial and 5 days before Kara told me to be out in 3. The envelope had been slid under my door without a stamp, the top corner bent like a guilty shoulder. I placed it flat under the dog-bone magnet beside the invoice. 2 dates, 2 lies, 1 house. Evening brought that dim gold our block always gets when every porch light comes on within 10 minutes, like we're all answering the same roll call. I made tea I wouldn't drink and tried not to look at the empty space at the table where my son used to thump his knee. At 9:03, I tried, calling him again, and got the same voicemail. "This mailbox is full." I listened to it twice as if full mailboxes are messages. At 11:22 p.m., my phone chirped. Kara. "Just confirming. 3 days means December 18th, her voice said. Sugar-dipped steel. "A realtor will meet you then, and we'll make this as gentle as possible." The message ended with a little exhale that wasn't grief. I saved the audio and typed a note in the same folder as last night. Threat, December 13th, 11:22 p.m. December 18th. Not codes, just the truth in words I could read when my hands shook. I carried the denim jacket to the bedroom and laid it across the quilt my wife had pieced from old work shirts. "If you're gone," I said to the ceiling, to God, to the space a son leaves when he's taken from a house too early, "I'll leave the porch light on anyway." The radiator clicked, like a metronome marking losses. "If you're not," I added, "I'll find you, and I'll do it with paper you can hold." Sleep finally came in torn strips. Somewhere between the second and third strip, I sat up and wrote one more line on a yellow pad on the nightstand. "Treat grief like a case." File. I capped the pen and lay back down. The porch light burned a square on the snow outside, clean and stubborn, and I told myself that in the morning I would stop thinking like a father and start thinking like an electrician again, by code, by sequence, by what must be true or nothing works. Paper belongs to the living. That's what I told myself on the morning of December 14th as I scraped the frost off my windshield with an expired insurance card and drove toward the strip mall coffee shop off Washington Street. The world outside looked frozen solid, but I could feel the current moving under the ice. Serena was already inside, laptop open, steam from her cup fogging the corners of her glasses. My niece had that mix of kindness and fight my sister never lost. "Uncle Marty," she said, sliding a packet of napkins my way. "Start talking." I laid everything out on the table, like a dealer in a game I didn't plan to lose. The florist invoice, dated December 7th, the Reliant Mutual letter, stamped December 10th, and the bank statement showing $12,000 transfers to Helena Care Group. Serena clicked her pen 3 times and circled each date in red. "These are all before the funeral was even announced." She leaned closer. "You said Kara told you it was a sealed casket because of an order. Illinois doesn't issue anything like that." I looked up the statute. Only medical quarantine or contamination cases qualify. Offshore accident doesn't count. I took a slow sip of burnt coffee. "So she lied." "She planned," Serena corrected. "If there's a paper trail, she left it. She called her paralegal buddy at Wexler and Mott, who owed her a favor." 5 minutes later, her phone buzzed. "Got it," she murmured, reading a text. "Funeral home deposit on December 8th, $14,600, paid by Kara Redding, non-refundable." She turned the screen toward me. 3 days before she told you there'd even be a service." The diner's chatter turned muffled. The pieces lined up like conduit through drywall. Precise, hidden, dangerous. "Okay," Serena said, flipping to a clean page in her notebook. "Here's the play. Step 1, we freeze the property, file for a temporary restraining order so she can't list it, sell it, or change locks. Step 2, we subpoena records from Helena Care Group and St. Luke's ER, December 2nd through 10. Step 3, notice the insurer to preserve communications. No confrontation, no trespassing, no yelling, just paper." I nodded. The electrician in me admired her system, 1 circuit at a time, no overloads. Before she packed up, Serena dialed Helena Care. Group on speaker. After 2 rings, a woman's voice came through, raspy, tired, maybe midnight shift tired. "Helena Admissions, this is Diane." I said, "Good morning. I'm trying to confirm if a patient named Samuel Redding—" "There's no one by." "That name," she interrupted, tone sharp. Serena mouthed alias. I cleared my throat. "Could there be an administrative name on file? I can provide a wristband number if—" "Visit with counsel," Diane said quickly, then hung up. Serena stared at the phone. That wasn't a flat no. That was a scared no. I felt my pulse. Hammer in my neck. "Then he's there." She gave a small nod. "Then he's there." When I got home, the kitchen smelled faintly of burnt toast. I took it as a sign to stay alert. I grabbed the house deed, tax receipts, and utility stubs and slipped them into a fireproof folder. Then I crossed the street to Tom's place. Tom opened the door in his usual flannel and trucker cap. "Morning, Marty. You look like a man about to do his taxes early." I explained quietly that Kara might try the locks. Tom scratched his chin, then disappeared for a second and came back holding a thumb drive. "My Ring camera points at your driveway. I'll give you a copy if she comes sniffing around." "Appreciate it," I said. "Don't thank me yet," he replied. "If she's bold enough to fake a funeral, she's bold enough to test a door." I went back across the street, set the folder on the table, and clicked the pen Serena had left me, 3 times like she did. By the time the porch light flicked on automatically at dusk, I drafted a list on yellow paper. File TRO tomorrow. Ochoa. Verify Helena admission alias, copy Tom's video files, preserve florist and funeral invoices. I slid the list into the folder, poured myself black coffee, and stared at the reflection in the window. My wife used to say planning is how faith wears its work clothes. That night, the house hummed quietly around me. Every lamp, every heater, every socket I'd ever wired seemed to whisper the same thing. Check the current before you touch the line. By midnight, the plan was alive. Tomorrow, we'd start switching it on. A man with a file is louder than a man with a shout. On December 15th, the frost hadn't lifted from the roofs when I parked outside Attorney Pilar Ochoa's office on Jefferson Avenue. The building was a dull beige, box with blinds half closed, but inside it smelled of toner, peppermint, and quiet purpose. Serena walked beside me, her notebook already open, while I carried a folder thick enough to bruise a conscience. Pilar Ochoa was small, brisk, and direct. "Mr. Redding," she said, shaking my hand, "I've read Serena's summary. Let's see the evidence." I spread everything across her desk. The florist invoice dated December 7th, the Reliant Mutual letter dated December 10th, the $12,000 Helena Care transfers from December 1st, and my recorded 3 days Martin threat from the front steps. Pilar's pencil hovered over each document like a metronome. "She has no standing to remove you," she said finally. "The property deed lists you as sole owner. We can file for an emergency TRO, temporary restraining order, to stop any sale or possession transfer. We'll also send preservation notices to the insurer and the rehab facilities. If she tries to act before the hearing, we can use that as evidence of bad faith." She looked me in the eye. "You've done your homework, Mr. Redding. That's what saves cases." By noon, her clerk had time-stamped our TRO petition. The stack of exhibits, Threat U1 transcript, invoices, bank slips, and tax receipts looked ordinary in the folder but carried my entire life inside it. At 2:30 p.m., the courier left her office to serve Cara. I drove home feeling like I'd just laid wire in wet concrete. Dangerous work, but necessary. At 4:12 p.m., my doorbell rang. I half expected a deputy. Instead, there was Cara in her black wool coat, flanked by a tall man in an overcoat with a realtor's smile. Her eyes were dry and glossy, her lips stretched thin. "You have until the 18th, Martin," she said, like someone reciting. "A friendly reminder." I pressed the record button on my phone. "You might want to update your calendar," I said. The court accepted a TRO hearing for December 22nd. Her smile cracked a little. The man beside her adjusted his scarf, trying not to look involved. "That's a mistake," Cara said, her voice dipping an octave lower. "I keep all my paperwork straight," I replied, "and I keep backups." For a few seconds, no one spoke. Snow started falling again, soft, almost polite. Cara turned on her heel and walked back to the car. The man muttered something about calling the board. I watched their taillights disappear down the street, then locked the door twice. That night, I sat with Tom in his driveway. He'd set up his laptop, the screen glowing blue in the dark. We watched the ring footage from the night before. A locksmith van, slowing near my curb at 9:40 p.m., brake lights pulsing, then speeding off when Tom stepped onto his porch, holding his mug like a warning. "That's one brave locksmith," Tom said. "One reckless widow," I answered. We saved the clip and labeled it Lock Attempt. I copied it to my flash drive and tucked it into my file folder under the invoices. Meanwhile, Pilar emailed notices to Helena Care Group and St. Luke's ER, demanding preservation of all records relating to any male patient aged 30 to 40, admitted between December 2nd and December 10th. She also drafted subpoenas for the funeral home and insurer, requesting communications with Cara dated prior to December 12th, the day of the memorial. Every request was clean, lawful, by the book. By 10 p.m., I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by papers, fanned out like cards in a magician's trick. Except mine weren't illusions. They were facts, ink, dates, signatures, proof that the story she sold didn't match the math beneath it. I poured myself a whiskey and let the burn remind me I was still alive. For years I'd believed my tools were pliers, screwdrivers, wires. That night, I realized my new tools were invoices, affidavits, and certified mail receipts. Every sheet was a voltage line running straight into the lie she built. I looked out at the snow and whispered, "You can fake a death, Kara, but you can't fake the current running through what's real." The porch light flickered once, probably just the cold, but I like to think the house agreed with me. Tomorrow, we'd trace the next circuit, Helena Care Group. The current had to lead somewhere, and I was ready to follow it without flinching. The voice on the other end knew my son's breath. It was December 16th, the day Kara's confidence began to buckle. Serena called me early, 7:42 a.m., her tone clipped and professional. "We're trying Helena again today," she said. "Different shift, different voice." By noon, she was on speaker in my kitchen. She'd dialed Helena Care Group's main line, pretending to be from Pilar's office. A night shift nurse answered, weary but gentle. Serena kept her voice calm. "Hi, we're verifying records under legal counsel," she began. "We believe a male patient, mid-30s, left shoulder lightning bolt tattoo, was admitted December 4th under an administrative alias." There was silence, a long, weighted pause. Then the nurse said softly, "I can't confirm names." Serena's pen hovered. "Understood," she said. "But—" The nurse's voice trembled, almost like a secret trying to slip free. "A patient with that tattoo is here. He's not a ghost." The line clicked dead. I stood frozen. My coffee went cold on the counter. The hum of the refrigerator filled the room, steady and real, grounding me back to the moment. "He's alive," I whispered. Serena exhaled shakily. "We can't quote her, but we can point the court to the timing and the alias. We just got our hinge." By afternoon, reality pressed in. I was back to sorting documents, trying to keep my mind from running too far ahead. At 2:11 p.m., I heard something slide against the front door. I opened it and found an envelope, no postage, just my name written in Kara's cursive. Inside was a letter from Reliant Mutual Insurance, dated December 10th. "We acknowledge receipt of initial widow inquiry for the policy of Samuel Redding, 2 days before the memorial." 2 days before anyone told me my son was gone. I stared at the page until the ink seemed to shift. My chest felt hollow and hot all at once. I took the letter to the table, spread it beside the florist invoice, the funeral deposit date, the transfer receipts, each one a nail in her narrative's coffin. At dusk, Tom texted me, "Locksmith van again, different driver this time." I pulled on my coat and walked outside. Sure enough, headlights flickered across the street, slowing near my mailbox. Tom stood on his porch with his mug, same as before. The van hesitated, then rolled away. We exchanged a look. "Got it on video?" I asked. "Already sent to your email," he said. "If they're testing the door twice, they're planning something." I forwarded the clip to Pilar with the subject line, "Lock attempt to 2." Within an hour, she'd fired off a cease and desist to Kara's professional email, CCing the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation, Kara's. Retaliation came quick. The next morning, she showed up with 2 women I'd never seen before, both holding cardboard boxes, posing for photos on my lawn like it was an open house. Kara laughed too loudly. That realtor laugh meant for clients, not widows. I opened the window just enough for my voice to carry. "The court hearing is December 22nd, I said evenly. "You might want to save your gas money." One of the women looked confused. The other lowered her phone. Kara just smiled, bright and brittle. "Public record, Martin," she said. "You can't stop progress." When they finally drove away, I stood in the doorway for a long time, listening to the quiet drip of melting snow from the gutters. My hands shook, but not from fear. That night I sat at my desk and recorded a message to myself, something to anchor my thoughts when the noise got too loud. "If he's alive," I said softly into the mic, "I'll bring him home with paper, not fists. With truth, not threats." She buried a lie. "I'll exhume it line by line." I closed the laptop, turned off the lights, and stared at the glowing porch bulb through the window. It lit the snow in gold. Somewhere in that gold, I decided, this wasn't about grief anymore. It was about justice, dressed in winter's clothes. Tomorrow, we'd prepare for the reveal. The courtroom was waiting, and so was the truth. The casket wasn't for a body. It was for a story. By the morning of December 20th, I'd stopped shaking when I said my son's name, not because it hurt less, but because now I had something harder than pain, proof. Serena and I drove through slush and salt to Attorney Ochoa's office to assemble our exhibit binder. The TRO hearing was in 2 days, and Pilar ran the room, like a command center. "Every number, every date, every name," she said, spreading folders across the conference table. "No emotion, just arithmetic." She slid a new document to me with latex-gloved precision. "St. Luke's ER responded to our subpoena." The paper trembled slightly as I read. It wasn't long, 1 page, a partial intake summary. Date, December 4th. The notes mentioned a male, mid-30s, admitted for orthopedic and pulmonary trauma, following Marine site incident. And then, there it was. Spouse, carer R. Father called, advised of non-disclosure per spouse request. I had never been called. I traced the printed letters with my finger. "She shut me out," I said quietly. "Even from the hospital." Pilar nodded, expression flat but eyes fierce. "And then she turned that silence into a memorial." The second page, clipped to the summary, was a photograph. An ER wristband, blurred but legible enough to show the date 1204 and the ID number beginning with cell ER34. Name redacted, but the nurse's note referenced distinct lightning bolt. Tattoo left shoulder. Serena leaned forward. "That's him," she whispered. "That's our alias." The truth wasn't a lightning strike. It was a slow, steady current, silent until it burned through insulation. I sat back, remembering the nurse's phone call from 2 days earlier. "He's not a ghost." Pilar gathered the documents into a clean plastic sleeve. "We'll mark this. Exhibit J. This changes the story entirely. Kara didn't just mislead you, she orchestrated a fraudulent death narrative. The casket, the flowers, the insurance inquiry, it's a full pattern." We went down the checklist. Florist invoice. Dated Deck 7, earlier than the announced memorial. Funeral deposit on Deck 8, paid by Kara. Insurance inquiry on Deck 10. TRO, filing on Deck 15. The through line was perfect in its arrogance. Pilar drafted an emergency addendum to include the new evidence. "We'll also request a live verification from Helena's medical director," she said. "If he's stable enough, the judge can hear confirmation of life during the hearing." At 3:18 p.m., her paralegal knocked. "Helena's counsel on the line," she said. Pilar put it on speaker. The voice was curt, male, defensive at first. "We can't disclose," Pilar cut him off politely. "This is a preservation notice. With subpoena authority, either you acknowledge or we escalate." A pause. Papers rustled, then the voice softened. "A supervising nurse is willing to produce an affidavit confirming ongoing care for a male matching your identifiers since December 5th. Condition, improving." Serena and I looked at each other. My eyes burned, but not from tears. It was voltage behind them. That night, I sat at my kitchen table again. The air smelled faintly of paper and coffee, and maybe victory, though I didn't trust the word yet. I opened the binder one last time, tracing the tabs, A through J, like rosary beads. My wife would have said this was my kind of prayer. At 10:47 p.m., Serena texted me, "Affidavit signed, notarized, scanned. He's alive. See you in court Thursday." I stared at the message until the words blurred. Then I whispered to the empty house, She buried my son on paper. I'll resurrect him the same way. The porch light glowed outside, haloing the snow. Somewhere in that silence, I felt my son breathing again. Not in memory, but in the world. Tomorrow, the courthouse would hear the story she built, and I would be there, with my binder, my receipts, and a living truth ready to break its own seal. Truth sounds different in a room with microphones. December 22nd, 9 a.m., DuPage County Courthouse. The hallways smelled like paper, disinfectant, and nervous perfume. I clutched my binder the way I used to grip my toolbox, tight enough that my fingerprints left half-moons in the vinyl. Serena walked beside me in her grey coat, calm as a metronome. Pilar Ochoa led the way, her leather briefcase swinging at her side like a weapon of choice. Courtroom 4C was already half full when we entered. Cara sat at the respondent's table in a sleek black suit, hair pinned back, eyes rimmed in practiced sorrow. Beside her, her realtor partner adjusted his tie, pretending to be supportive but radiating self-preservation. When our eyes met, Cara didn't flinch. She smiled, small and smug, the kind of smile people wear when they think the paper is on their side. The bailiff called the session to order. Judge Miles entered, a tall man with a weary kindness around the eyes. Case number 22, TRO 3186, Redding versus Redding. Pilar stood. Your Honor, my client, Mr. Martin Redding, seeks a temporary restraining order preventing the respondent from listing or occupying his residence or from disposing of property belonging to him on grounds of fraudulent misrepresentation. The judge nodded. Proceed. Pilar opened her binder. The sound of that clasp clicking was louder than it should have been, like a lock giving way. Your Honor, the respondent informed my client his son, Samuel Redding, was deceased following an offshore rig accident. A sealed casket memorial was held December 12th. 3 days later, she told my client he had until the 18th to vacate his home. However, she paused just long enough for the words to hang like fog. The evidence will show that Samuel Redding is alive. A low ripple of sound passed through the courtroom. Cara's fingers tightened around her pen. Pilar began laying exhibits on the clerk's desk, narrating each like a liturgy. Exhibit A, florist invoice dated December 7th, 5 days before the memorial was announced. Exhibit B, funeral deposit receipt, $14,600, dated December 8th, paid by respondent. Exhibit C, Reliant Mutual letter dated December 10th, acknowledging a widow inquiry 2 days prior to the funeral. She lifted the next document. Exhibit D, bank statement showing $12,000 transfers initiated December 1st from the alleged decedent to Helena Care Group. Exhibit E, recorded threats. You have 3 days to get out, verbatim. Exhibit F, ring camera footage of attempted locksmith entry on December 16th. Exhibit G, St. Luke's ER intake summary, dated December 4th, showing the decedent's tattoo description and reference to spouse Cara R. Exhibit H, affidavit from Helena Care Group nurse supervisor confirming an adult male matching those identifiers has been in care since December 5th, alive and improving. The judge's pen stopped mid-note. He looked over his glasses. Ms. Ochoa, are you saying there was no body? No legal verification of death was ever filed, she said. The sealed casket was voluntary. My client was denied access under false pretense. The judge turned to Cara's counsel. Response. Her attorney rose, shuffling papers. Your Honor, this is a misunderstanding. My client was under emotional distress and relied on information provided by the hospital after the accident. Pilar interrupted, voice cool. The hospital has confirmed no death certificate exists. The patient, Mr. Redding's son, is alive, recovering, and under protective care. We will provide live confirmation. The judge nodded slowly. Proceed. Pilar gestured toward the speakerphone set on the evidence table. Your Honor, Helena Care Group's supervising nurse, Ms. Linda Kowalski, is on the line under subpoena. The bailiff pressed a button. Static filled the room. Then a woman's voice came through, calm and deliberate. This is Nurse Kowalski. I can confirm a male patient matching your subject's age and tattoo identifier was admitted December 5th. He is conscious, recovering, and not deceased. Silence swallowed the room. Kara's eyes darted between her attorney and the judge. Her lips parted as if to object, but no sound came out. The judge's pen clattered to the desk. Let the record reflect, he said. The respondent represented the petitioner's son as deceased without confirmation and attempted to take possession of petitioner's property under that claim. He exhaled, long and steady. Effective immediately, I am issuing an injunction prohibiting any sale, listing, or modification of Mr. Redding's property. Furthermore, this court refers the matter of potential insurance fraud and misrepresentation to the state's attorney's office for review. Kara's attorney tried to stand again, but the judge cut him off with a raised hand. Sit down, counsel. This isn't a debate. It's a reckoning. I couldn't move. The words "he is conscious, recovering, and not deceased" echoed through me like an electrical hum that wouldn't fade. Serena touched my shoulder, and Pilar whispered, "Breathe, Martin. You did it." Across the aisle, Kara's face cracked. The mask slipped. The tremor at the corner of her mouth betrayed her. Calm. Her realtor partner sank in his seat, whispering something about miscommunication under his breath. Pastor Glenn, sitting behind me, bowed his head. I heard him whisper a prayer, not for the dead, but for the living who tried to play dead and lost. When the gavel struck, the sound rang like a breaker flipping back on after a long blackout. The judge stood. "Homes are not bargaining chips," he said. "Court adjourned." As we gathered our papers, I looked across the courtroom one last time. Kara avoided my gaze, fumbling with her purse, eyes glossy. I almost pitied her. Almost. But then I remembered her voice outside my house. 3 days, Martin. 3 days. And now, not even her story would stand another hour. Outside, the air was bright and cold. The courthouse steps gleamed under sunlight and salt. Reporters weren't there. This wasn't that kind of scandal, but I didn't need cameras. I had the only proof that mattered. My son was alive, my name still on the deed, and my faith in paper restored. I pulled my coat tighter, exhaled fog into the wind, and whispered, "The lights are back on." Tomorrow we'd start making the justice permanent. When justice moves, it leaves a paper trail. The courthouse corridors emptied into cold sunlight. And for the first time in weeks, I felt air that didn't taste like fear. But justice isn't a thunderclap. It's the sound of paperwork sliding across desks. Between December 23rd and the new year, that's all I heard. The shuffle of forms, the hum of copy machines, the steady rhythm of truth setting its own foundation. Pilar wasted no time. On the 23rd, she filed a protective order assigning temporary medical guardianship over my son to a neutral advocate, cutting Kara out completely. "She's no longer next of kin for decision-making," Pilar said, tapping her pen on the order. "You're his parent again, Mr. Redding, as it should have been." Christmas Eve came quiet. The snow fell in layers, clean and heavy. I didn't buy gifts. I printed documents. Pilar had requested updated affidavits from Helena Care Group and St. Luke's ER. Both arrived before midnight, proofs stamped, notarized, certified. My living son existed in signatures now. I placed those pages under the tree instead of ornaments on. December 27th, the phone rang at 9:31 a.m. Serena's voice was bright for the first time in weeks. "You got clearance," she said. "Helena approved your visit." I sat in my car in the facility's parking lot for 10 minutes before walking in. The nurse at reception recognized my name and smiled softly. "He's been asking about you." She said, "The hallway smelled of antiseptic and hope. When I entered his room, my son was thinner, pale, but his chest rose in even rhythm. A bruise darkened his collarbone like a fading storm. He looked up, confusion flashing into recognition. "Dad," he rasped, voice rough but real. I reached for his hand, warm and alive. "I'm here," I said. The light was on. He squeezed weakly, a half smile twitching through exhaustion. She said, "It'd be easier this way," he murmured. I shook my head. Easier for her, harder for the truth. When I left the room, I signed the visitor's log carefully, noting the time like it was scripture. December 28th, 2:47 p.m. My signature shook, but not from age, from relief. 2 days later, Pilar forwarded a letter from the Illinois Realtor Board. License suspended. Pending investigation. Probable cause of fraudulent misrepresentation. Kara's face, once polished for open houses, now sat in a file marked Complaint Review. At the same time, Reliant Mutual Insurance confirmed receipt of Pilar's fraud alert and froze all payments under the widow claim. Their investigators, email read, "Pending confirmation of claimant's misrepresentation, policy hold in effect." And then came January 3rd, the final hearing. The courtroom was less crowded this time, no drama left, only consequences. Judge Miles reviewed the new filings in silence before speaking. This court converts the temporary injunction into a permanent order. The respondent, Kara Redding, is barred from entering or altering the petitioner's residence. She is removed from medical decision authority. Furthermore, the state's attorney's office will review possible insurance and real estate fraud for formal charges. His gavel came down once, crisp and final. Homes aren't stage props. Lives aren't real estate listings. And the truth, no matter how deeply someone buries it, doesn't stay underground forever. I left the courthouse that day with a folder full of orders and affidavits, the paper trail of survival. The sun caught the pages through the manila, and they glowed faintly gold in my hands. Outside, I paused on the steps. Snow fell soft and clean, erasing footprints behind me. I smiled for the first time in a month. Justice wasn't loud, but it was real, and it had my name on every page. Boundaries are just love with a gate. By January 5th, the air in Naperville had the kind of bite that makes wood pop in the furnace and men think about starting over. The holidays had come and gone without the noise of pitying neighbors or casseroles wrapped in foil. For the first time in a long while, my house belonged to peace. That morning, I opened an email from Pilar. The subject line read, "Board findings." I clicked it open and smiled. Probable cause confirmed. Ethical and procedural violations under investigation. Kara's realtor license was now formally suspended. Beneath that was another email chain. Reliant Mutual Insurance acknowledging. Our transcript submission and confirming all widow benefit claims were frozen pending fraud review. Paper again. My kind of victory. Around noon, Tom walked over from across the street, lugging a toolbox and 2 thermoses of chili. "Time to swap those locks, pal," he said, grinning. "One last job before we retire for real." We spent an hour at the front door, unscrewing brass plates dulled from 30 winters. The metal clicked clean, each turn of the screwdriver sounding like punctuation. Click, 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 closing the sentence on everything she'd tried to write for me. When the new deadbolt slid into place, I exhaled for what felt like the first time since December. Tom handed me a thermos. "Here's to the quiet life," he said. "To proof and patience," I replied. We ate chili at the kitchen counter like 2 old cops done with their last case. Outside, the snowlight bounced off the window and caught the edge of my binder on the table, the one labeled Redding versus Redding. I didn't have to open it anymore. Just seeing it there reminded me I'd built something stronger than anger, documentation that could outlive lies. Later that day, I drove to Helena Care Group again. My son was awake longer this time, color back in his face. The machines around him beeped with a rhythm that felt like forgiveness. "They told me you fought for me," he said quietly. "I did what fathers do," I replied. "Kept the lights on." He smiled, faint but real. "She said it would be easier if you thought I was gone." "She was wrong," I said. "Easier isn't the same as better." He looked away toward the window, the winter light touching his cheek like apology. I reached into my coat and handed him his phone, newly restored. "Password still the dog's name, right?" That crooked grin came back, the one from Little League and garage projects. "Always was." We didn't talk much after that. We didn't have to. When I got home, I stood in the doorway and listened. The house was quiet but alive. The hum of the heater, the tick of the clock, the whisper of branches against the siding. I realized then that boundaries aren't about walls. They're about doors that only open to the right people. I poured a small glass of bourbon and stepped out onto the porch. The snow under the streetlight sparkled faintly, untouched. Somewhere Kara was facing her own set of papers now, charges, audits, interviews. I didn't need revenge anymore. The system was handling it. Inside, my kitchen clock clicked to 10:05 p.m. The porch light glowed steady, casting a soft ring on the frozen lawn. I raised my glass to it and said quietly, "To boundaries, and to gates that only open from the inside." Then I locked the door behind me, not out of fear, but out of love for what I'd saved. They tried to bury me with silence. I answered with paper. Spring came to Naperville like it always does, slowly at first, like the world was afraid to thaw after what it saw. The snow retreated from the sidewalks in streaks, leaving behind salt lines and cigarette butts. The dogwoods on Jefferson Street started blooming early that April, pink petals clinging to wet branches like half-kept promises. I took my morning walks again, passing St. Bartholomew's every day. For the first time since December, the bells didn't sound like reminders, they sounded like punctuation. I had thought the story was done, but justice has its own aftershocks. One bright Wednesday, Pilar called. "State's attorney just closed the review," she said. They issued a warning letter to Reliant Mutual and a formal referral for potential fraud charges. Kara's counsel offered a settlement. Mutual understanding was the phrase. I smiled, though no one could see it. "We decline," I said. "She'll face her own consequences now," Pilar added. "You just keep living in that house." That afternoon, I printed the letter she forwarded, the official state notice, and pinned it to my bulletin board above the table. It sat beside the first florist invoice, the TRO order, and the January 3rd injunction. Together they looked like a constellation, points of light that, when connected, spelled out survival. A week later, Pastor Glenn asked me to speak at the men's breakfast at St. Bartholomew's. "Just tell them what you learned," he said. "They don't need sermons. They need truth." So that Saturday, I stood in front of a dozen men drinking burnt coffee and poking at scrambled eggs on styrofoam plates. I held up a single bank slip, the same one I'd kept since December. "This number," I said, tapping it with my finger, "saved my life. $12,000, recurring transfer from my son's account, dated after the day they said he died. Proof that the living still breathe, even on paper." The room was silent, except for the hum of the vending machine. I told them about the lies, the court, the paperwork, the light that never went out, not to boast, just to show what happens when a man refuses to vanish quietly. When I finished, one man in the back wiped his eyes. Another said, "My mother's been sick. Her husband's handling all the papers. Maybe I should start looking at the dates." "Do," I said. "Dates. Don't lie, people do." Afterward, I walked out into the parking lot. The air was warm, the pavement steaming from last night's rain. I stood there a moment, watching the sunlight catch the church's brick facade. The same church where Kara had staged her morning show, where she'd pressed my hand and whispered that I should let go. I laughed quietly. I did let go, I said to no one in particular, of believing her, On the drive home, I took the long way through Maple Street, past the rehab center, past the coffee shop where Serena and I had first made our plan. The trees along the road looked taller somehow, like they'd survived the same winter I had. When I pulled into my driveway, the porch light was still on, though the sun was bright enough that it didn't need to be. Habit, I guess, or maybe faith. Inside, I placed the bank slip back in its folder, next to a clean sheet of paper labeled Estate, updated. I wrote 2 sentences at the top. You didn't lose me. You gave me away. But I came back for what was mine. Then I closed the folder, locked it in the drawer, and let the light spill through the window. The house felt different now. Not haunted, not heavy. Just lived in, just earned. Sometimes justice isn't a gavel. Sometimes it's a porch light that never burns out. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you're listening at night, set your thermostat the way you like it. No one else gets a vote.